Counting down to 2020, while Senator Elizabeth Warren rides the momentum from big crowd sizes and growing poll numbers all the way to next week's debate, some are questioning Vice President Joe Biden's momentum. From the New York Times' Mark Leibovich, on certain days, Biden 2020 can feel more like a dutiful slog than the last march of a happy warrior. So let's analyze it with host of Left Coast News, Ethan Behrman, and GOP pollster Chris Wilson. Welcome to you both, gentlemen.
Thanks, Shannon.
Happy Labor Day, Shannon.
And to you as well. All right, Chris, that article goes on to use the words obligation and responsibility to talk about why Joe Biden is running. And when he was asked why, he really sort of stumbled all over that question. And that didn't inspire confidence for a lot of the folks involved in the Democratic primary.
Yeah, it really did. And it was kind of his Ted Kennedy moment. It's the one thing that everybody who works the campaign knows that the candidate has to have an answer for is why he wants to be president. And this was Biden's time to answer, and he swung and he missed. I think Joe Biden is really finding two things that are creating problems for him. One is he's really a relatively weak front runner. If you compare him to like Hillary Clinton in 2016, she was consistently above 50, or even like George W. Bush in 2000, who was always above 50%. He stays in the high 20s, low 30s, and can't really seem to break away from the pack. If anything, has seen his lead dissipate. But the second part of it is this is just not your father's Democratic Party. He is just an old style big government liberal in a party and a lot of voters that are looking for real socialists, and he's not far enough left for them. And I think it makes he's having to now abandon a lot of the principles that he's fought for the last 3, 4, 5 decades to be able to capitulate to the wishes of the Democratic electorate, and he's not having a good time doing it.
Well, the New York Times then goes on to talk about how there are other candidates in the race who have very clearly articulated their whys. They say this: supporters of Ms. Warren would readily point to her fight against a corrupt political system. Supporters of Mr. Sanders have been hearing his protest against the scourge of economic inequality in America for decades. Supporters of Pete Buttigieg would extol him as a force for the generational change that Washington begs for. Ethan, why do you think it's so hard for the Biden campaign to sort of crystallize into this issue of why he's actually running after all this time?
Well, I don't know if it's as hard as everybody wants to make it out to be, and I give Chris a lot of credit for his polling capabilities, but let's keep in mind, every single poll over the last several months shows Biden beating Trump, and that's what this is all about. Here's a guy who's given 5 decades of his life to public service. That's why the word duty comes into play. His wife and child died in a car wreck, and he still continued to serve his country. His son died before the 2016 elections, and he chose to take a little quiet time with his family. He has given a life of service to this country that is a reason to serve, to defeat Donald Trump, and he is leading in the polls now. He hasn't pulled ahead in the primaries yet with the Democratic Party, but it's still quite early, and January will show whether or not he can really pull it out. And he very well may, but overall, he's ahead of Trump.
Okay, well, from the Washington Post, they say Joe Biden, the anemic frontrunner, in this piece by Paul Waldman, says his candidacy has essentially been a series of small controversies over old positions and new misstatements, with a tepid debate performance or two thrown in. The Democratic primary contest is being led by someone who may not particularly enjoy running for president and is plainly not very good at it. I mean, Chris, Ethan talks about the fact that it's about beating President Trump, and that's essentially the answer that Biden sort of ended up with when he was asked about this. Is that going to be enough?
Yeah, and that's, I think, the problem is Ethan's right. Joe Biden, I think, would give Democrats a good chance in the general election, assuming that the economy doesn't stay where it is, just because he is the more moderate of the candidates running right now. Whenever the rest of them are really so far to the left, I think they'd have challenges running a competitive race. But as you said in the Leibovich piece, he points out that that's not a good enough reason for someone to run for president. Just because you want to beat the incumbent doesn't make you a candidate who can then articulate why voters should choose you. And I think it's a real challenge. I think Ethan chooses or points out about Biden what his strengths are. Is right now he gives Democrats their best general election opportunity. But in a primary, that's really not enough when you've got a lot of primary voters who are looking for red meat socialism, and he's just not serving that up in a way that makes them happy.
All right, let's put up the polling. This is the average of Real Clear Politics polling. And when you look at this, the numbers that Sanders and Warren, and they have a lot of the similar positions, have together, that does beat Biden. I mean, if one of them eventually drops out, is forced out of the race, Ethan, do you think that the further left coalesces behind at least one candidate in a way that will get him a real challenge quickly?
Well, I mean, that's the problem, is I think Bernie's expiration date was 2016, and I don't know that enough of his supporters get behind Elizabeth Warren. I think it's very possible that Biden pulls it out.
Okay. We got to leave it there. Gentlemen, thank you both for being with us on this Labor Day evening.